If we want to take our poster to get professionally printed, there's a couple things that we need to do first. One of those things is to change the color mode. The color mode that we've been using so far in this class is RGB, which is great for viewing things on screen because it's the same color mode that screens use to represent colors. In RGB, there are 3 subpixels for every pixel that have the different primary colors red, green, and blue. Those pixels can be illuminated in different amounts to display any of the colors that the display can show. So for instance, if we turn the red pixel and the green pixel on to 100%, but leave the blue pixel completely black, we'll get yellow. If we turn all pixels on to 100%, we get pure white. And if we want to represent black, then we actually turn off all the pixels. When we want to print things, we need to use a different model because printing uses a different system for representing colors. On the screen, we're actually illuminating pixels, and so we're adding colors together to get white. In print, we're adding ink together to get black. And so if we want to get white, we actually have to subtract all the colors, which is why it's called a subtractive color model. And this actually makes sense because if you think about the paper, it starts as white. So if we want to represent white in a document, we're going to simply just not print anything on top of it. If we want it to be anything but white, we're going to have to add ink in order to represent those colors. In CMYK, we use the primary colors cyan, magenta, and yellow, and mix those colors together in different amounts to get whatever color we want. So for instance, if we mix 100% of yellow and cyan together, we get green. If we mix all 3 colors together, we get something similar to black, but in truth, it's not exactly black. It's a little bit off from black. And that's where the 4th primary color for CMYK comes in, represented by the K character, and that is representing black. Black allows us to, first of all, just apply black ink to the page, but adding different amounts of black to these colors can give us shades that will represent muddier versions of the colors. So these 4 colors together can give us whatever color we want with certain limitations. There's actually a 3rd color model that is also used in print called Pantone. Pantone is different because it uses pre-mixed inks. So instead of using CMYK, cyan, yellow, magenta, and black, you can use whatever colors you want and then apply those colors in different amounts to create whatever effect you want. This is often used in branded applications because brands will often have a certain Pantone color or a set of Pantone colors that are associated with their brand. And so using Pantone colors helps them to keep everything consistent. In other cases, it actually saves money to use premixed inks because you're able to get away with using less total inks in the print job. So if we want to print this poster, we're going to have to first convert it to CMYK and then choose between CMYK and Pantone colors. Right now the document is in RGB, and we can tell that because it says it here in the file information. The decision to use CMYK or Pantone depends on a few factors, but a lot of times if you are printing not very many of a certain document, then you might be using CMYK, since often you'll be using what's called a digital print process. If you're printing a large quantity of a certain print job, then you may either use CMYK or Pantone. It depends on the situation. A lot of times if your document has a lot of different colors in it, then you might have to resort to CMYK, since using a different Pantone color for each of those colors would be impractical. But if your design only uses a few different colors, then Pantone is usually going to be cheaper and it's going to look better since Pantone has richer colors. So the first thing I'm going to do in this situation is go up to File and then down to Document Color Mode. And you can see that in this submenu, I have a choice between RGB and CMYK. Right now I'm in RGB, and when I click CMYK, it's going to change the color mode to CMYK. Nothing really changed in my document, But there might be some situations where things do change. I'll give you an example. So if I hit undo to change it back to RGB, I'm going to create a new shape, and I'm going to fill that shape with a very bright green color. Okay, this color is sort of a neon color, and it displays fine on the screen, but it's not a color that you can print with CMYK. CMYK has what's called a certain color gamut, which is the range of the colors that it can print. And with a normal CMYK process, you can't print anything nearly this bright. And so when I go to File and Color Mode and change it to CMYK, you'll see that this color changes drastically. And that's because Illustrator is recognizing that the color we were showing before isn't going to work using the CMYK process. So it took us to the nearest alternative, but it's still much muddier and darker than the original color. And that's just the reality of print, is that you can't print things in a super neon color like that with a CMYK color mode. With Pantone, you actually have a little bit more range, but you still can't print things that neon. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete that. And then let's look at some of the colors in this document. So if I go to Release Clipping Mask so I can adjust all these elements, select the background color, and then if I shift click on the swatch, we can see that the RGB representation of this color is to use a certain amount of blue, certain amount of green, and a certain amount of red, represented by these numbers over here. If I click this little drop-down menu and go to CMYK, you can see the CMYK alternative to that color is to use a certain percentage of cyan, magenta, and yellow. In this case, 41% cyan, 2% magenta, and 23% yellow are going to create this color. And in this case, 0% black. So you can go through your different colors and look at their CMYK representations. It's interesting to see how colors are created. If we want to change this to a Pantone color, then we're going to have to switch things up a little bit. And the first thing we need to do is pull up the actual Pantone book. So I can do this by going to the Swatches panel and then clicking this drop-down menu and then going down to Open Swatch Library. And then if you go down to Color Books, there's a bunch of options here, and the ones labeled Pantone are the books that represent the Pantone color model. The best one to choose by default is probably the solid uncoated or the solid coated. Uncoated and coated just refer to different types of paper, but I usually work with uncoated since it's the flattest color model and therefore it's best to start from. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and when I do, a window will pop up. I can expand this window to see all the colors that are part of the Pantone color model. Okay, so these are all the colors that are part of the Pantone color book, and all these colors are represented by a different number. And the nice thing about Pantone colors is that you can go to any printer in the world and tell them that you want a Pantone 630, and they will understand what that is. So if we wanted to convert this to a Pantone print, we'd have to build it using all the colors from this palette. So we'd have to find colors that were similar to the colors represented in this document. Since we can't choose any color we want, we have to stick to these pre-mixed colors. So for instance, with this background color, something kind of in here might be about right. We'd have to go through and find the right one. That one looks pretty good. So we'd have to adjust our entire document to use those colors. And if we were using a Pantone print, we would want to reduce the number of colors as much as possible. So any colors that were a little bit different, we want to bring them together so that we were reducing the total number of inks that we're using. And if I had a Pantone book with me, then I could look through that Pantone book, which contains a bunch of swatches of all the different colors in the Pantone model, and I could review those colors to make sure that it was the color I wanted. So in this case, I'm going to stick to CMYK, but it's good to know about Pantone because in a lot of situations, it's going to look better and save you money. So I'm going to go ahead and close the Pantone book here and delete this swatch, because I also want to talk about something called bleeds, which is another essential component to setting up your document for a print job. Bleeds are necessary whenever we want to print right to the edge of a page. So in this case, we want to bring this color right to the edge of the poster, and there's also the guitar that's going right to the edge of the poster as well. Printers can't actually do this. The way that they get it done is by slicing off the final art to get rid of any white borders that are on the outside. There's also a little bit of inconsistencies in printers and the way that they slice the final art, so they need some extra room in order to make that happen. It's not possible for them to print and then slice exactly down the line without either cutting off a bit of your art or leaving a little strip of white. So what printers want is a little bit extra art that is intended to be sliced off so that they can print that and then slice it off cleanly without leaving any kind of edge or affecting the final art itself. And that area is called the bleed. So right now we don't have any bleed set up. So what we're going to do is go to File and then down to Document Setup. And then in this dialog box, we can set up the bleed. This can also be set up when you create the document originally. So I'm just going to click the up arrow, and since this link is checked, it's going to affect all the bleeds on all 4 sides of the document. And checking it one time up is going to go to 1/8 inch, which is what we want because that's the industry standard for a bleed amount. You can check with your printer to see what size bleeds they want, because it could vary from printer to printer, but in most American printers, they're going to want 1/8 inch. Okay, so now that I have that selected, I'll click OK. You'll see that there's a new red line around my document. That red line is showing me how far I need to extend the art in order to fulfill the bleed settings. And then the original black line is what's called the trim line. That is the line where the printer is going to cut. So despite the fact that I'm extending my art for the purpose of the bleeds, the original poster design will still be the same. It's just something that we have to do in order to make sure that the final print looks correct. So in a lot of cases, it's really easy to do this. Let's go ahead and grab the background color and just extend it to that bleed line. Okay, and then we'll go to the other side and extend that as well. And then we'll extend it on the bottom as well. So now you can see that that background color is extended all the way out. And then we'll do the same for the guitar, except that's already ready to go. So the guitar is ready. It's a little bit annoying that it's coming right to the edge here. So to be totally safe, it may be good to extend the guitar a little bit more, just to make sure that we don't run into any issues where there's like a little bit of a corner of that color. Okay, so this is now set up for bleeds. It was really easy in this case, but in some situations you might have to get creative in order to fulfill that extra space. Or if you know that you're going to need a bleed, design so that you always have that little bit extra piece of art. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do to send this to the printer is export it in the right way. So I'm going to go up to File and Save As. I'm going to save it as poster. And I'm saving it as a PDF because that is a format that a lot of printers are going to want. But it's good to check with your printer to figure out what file format that they want to use. But PDF is relatively universal. As a starting point, I'm going to choose the preset high quality print. It's going to set things up in a way that are pretty standard, but we're going to want to make a few adjustments. So under the compression setting, there are some options here for how to handle images. In the case of this poster, we don't have any images, so it's not going to matter what we put in these settings. But if we have photographs inside of our document, then these settings will determine how those photographs are handled and compressed. So the downsampling will reduce the size of the photos if they're really large. The image quality will apply a certain compression algorithm to the images to make the file size smaller for the printer. If you don't want the Illustrator to compress the images at all, you can always change the compression to none. But by default, it will use JPEG, which will apply light compression at its maximum image quality setting. If you turn it down to medium or low, you may start to see a little bit of a degradation in quality, but usually it's pretty minor for print. Underneath the compression settings, you have marks and bleeds, and this is where we're going to use our document bleed settings. So if I click that, you can see that it's really light, but it says 0.125 inches in each of these boxes, which is what we want because we want to give our file over to the printer in that setting. Lastly, we're going to turn on trim marks, and these trim marks, also sometimes called crop marks, are going to tell the printer where to actually cut the final document. Some printers may not want this, so it's good to check in with them. And the same goes for the registration marks, the color bars, and page information. Some cases you might want to check these, but usually you're going to leave them off. Under the output setting, you have the ability to convert your colors to CMYK or to whatever your destination is. In this case, we already have our colors done in CMYK, so we're going to be in good shape without any conversion. But just as an example, if you had some photographs in your document that weren't converted to CMYK, this could be a way to convert all those to make sure that it's going to print in the right way. So if you choose Convert to Destination and choose CMYK as the destination profile, then it's going to convert all those colors to that profile. And in some cases, the printer might want a different type of color profile rather than just standard CMYK. So if the printer asks for something like Web Coded Swap 2006, then this is where you're going to change the color profile to that setting. In this case, I'm just going to leave my destination at CMYK. And after I do that, I'm pretty much ready to go. So I'll click Save PDF. And then after it's done saving, I can open that PDF from my file system and take a look at what it looks like. Let me zoom out a little bit. So you can see that the poster looks exactly what you'd expect, but there's a white border that's been added, and that white border is there to accommodate the trim marks or the crop marks. Those crop marks are these little black lines that, again, they tell the printer where to actually cut. So if I zoom into this and go over to the side, you can see that the crop marks are a little bit inside of the art. So the printer is going to slice vertically on this line, then horizontally on this line. And the result of that cutting is that we're going to get the exact same poster size that we started with before we applied the bleeds. But again, these bleeds are going to help us out in case there are any inconsistencies with the cutting. It's not going to be a big deal if the cut happens a little bit to the left or the right. We're still going to get the same basic result. And same as if the cut happens a little bit high or a little bit low. Since we've extended the art past the line, it's not going to be that big of a deal. The poster is still going to look essentially the same. And that's what the bleeds ensure, that we get that consistent result. So now that we have bleed set up and now that we're in the right color mode, we can send this file to our printer and the printer should be able to use it and print in an accurate way.